We ask Manuel Lopez Cano to come back up and tell us some more about diastasis recti.
Yeah. Thank you very much again, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again, Victor and Milka. I agree with you, Mark. For me, this problem is stronger or beats the problem of parastomal. Because if parastomal is difficult, the problem of rectus diastasis surpasses my knowledge. So I will try, this is my disclosures. I will try to divide my presentation. Probably I will meet with some reasonings and comments from Mark, but it's impossible not to meet regarding some ideas. But I try to divide in the problem some ideas, the elective surgery context, the decision-making context, concerns, at least from my point of view about the indication and the surgery itself, about rectus diastasis, and finally a short summary about the indications. So the problem, as you know, parastomal rectus diastasis is a benign condition. And for me, I try every day to be an abdominal wall surgeon. And for me, it's not a hernia. And for me, it is not a life-threatening condition. And all cases that we are operating on about rectus diastasis are in an elective context. And I think that this is very, I would like to highlight this idea of the elective context and move on to this second point. Because the indication for an operation in an elective surgery were established a lot of time ago, more than 1 century ago, as you can see here in this reference published in JAMA at the beginning of the last century. And the indications for an elective surgery like rectus diastasis has been based into 3 pillars. The first pillar is that we must be satisfied that the symptoms of the condition caused by the problem to be operated. The second pillar is that we must be satisfied that the symptoms will be relieved by the operation. And the third pillar of the indications for an elective surgery is that we must be satisfied that the danger of the operation itself justifies the potential functional outcomes. If we transfer these ideas, this pillar, to the rectus diastasis, if you allow me to do that, we are speaking about the pillar of the symptoms of rectus diastasis, the pillar of surgical evidence, and the pillar of the functional outcomes. If we look at the symptoms, of course, I need to go to the very recently published European Hernia Society guidelines about rectus diastasis. And the different key questions that appear in these guidelines, the key question 4 is exactly what symptoms are associated with the rectus diastasis. And the guidelines development group state that a range of symptoms is reported in the majority of papers published in the literature. And it is unknown whether the width of the diastasis is related with the severity of the symptoms. So the recommendation is that the majority of symptoms are connected with core instability, but also with an impaired body image. In other words, with an aesthetic condition. So this recommendation and these statements were the result of a systematic review of the literature with a very good methodology when the guidelines development group makes these guidelines. For this reason, regarding the symptoms, the information is heterogeneous in the literature and of low quality. If we move on to the second pillar, the surgical evidence, sorry for this chart, it's a bit dense, but as you can see, we have different scenarios regarding the surgical treatment of our rectus diastasis. Some group of studies, one group of studies without concomitant hernia, other group of studies with concomitant hernia. But in the column of the left, you can see the heterogeneity, a lot of techniques, open, laparoscopy, plication, mesh in different positions, adding another procedures like abdominoplasty and so on. But as you can see in the second column, the type of study, the majority of them were observational, no randomized controlled trial. And in the third column, the number of patients included in these different studies was very, very low. But even worse, the type of analysis was so heterogeneous and so different, using different type of suture, absorbable, non-absorbable, barbed sutures, using a different position when a mesh was associated to the repair, retromuscular, online, and so on. The follow-up was very, very short. So again, the recurrences, we have a wide range of recurrences, from 0 to 40% of recurrences. So again, the information regarding the surgical evidence is of low quality and very heterogeneous. If we move on to the third pillar, functional outcomes, I would like to show you this very recent, up-to-date literature review. And you can read here the conclusion of this review. The total lack of standardized instruments for assessing the outcomes in the context of rectus diastasis make it impossible to compare studies. So, trying to summarize the last 3 slides, maybe the indications we don't know in our rectus diastasis is the symptoms are because the rectus diastasis per se or due to an alteration of the entire abdominal wall. We don't know sometimes if it's only aesthetic or cosmetic impact in the quality of life of the patient. We need to know more about the role of the symptoms and the role of the surgery, and also the assessment of the outcomes is unclear so far, at least in my opinion. So the decision-making context is like I commented before regarding parastomal hernia. Agree with you, Mark, again, we have different models of decision-making. We can go from one extreme with a paternalistic or perfect surgeon where the surgeons decide the procedures, decide the treatment and the surgical treatment. In the other extreme, we have the patient decision. The typical example is the patient in a plastic surgery facility asking for an increase in breast size or so on. This is the decision of the patient, is not a decision of the surgeons. And for me, is in the middle, the shared decision-making, the best way to do. I don't want to repeat again, but the shared decision-making is a mix of evidence, values, and preferences, and the surgical experience in order to decide together the patient and the surgeon. Again, the guidelines were aware about that, this way to decide if the rectus diastasis should be operated or not. Because the key question 7, what are the surgical treatment options in patients without concomitant hernia? The recommendation is to use a shared decision-making process. Also, when we have a concomitant umbilical or epigastric hernia, and adding here that the mesh is suggested. So, what about concerns regarding the rectus diastasis? In my opinion, the concerns come from the surgeons, or comes from the evidence, because much of the published surgical research is of uncertain reliability. But also concerns are coming from the surgeons, because most of us are not aware of this problem, and we lack the necessary skills to evaluate the reliability and usefulness of the available surgical evidence. It is true. And some surgeons, maybe we are inclined to overassess our own abilities without comparing them with any alternative options, including nothing. And concerns coming from the patient, because the patients, at least in my context, in my country, they have an access to ubiquitous and regulated and enticing websites offering magic solutions for the repair of a rectus diastasis. Maybe is the reflect of a misinformation on the net? Also, patients and families frequently lack relevant, accurate medical evidence and skill guidance at the time of the shared decision-making. So in conclusion, in summary, for me, again, I don't want to repeat myself, but the indication for surgery in rectus diastasis should be the product of a shared decision-making process. Shared decision-making process, again, I repeat, is an essential constituent of the evidence-based medicine. We need also, at least in my country, a government restriction or regulation of these aggressive online marketing strategies, because the public needs to increase the awareness about the different process in order to safeguard the health and the patient itself. And probably, and it's my final word, probably we need more than ever a register about rectus diastasis in order to know, to evaluate longitudinally this type of patients and know the prompts in order to standardize the treatment of rectus diastasis. Thank you very much for your attention.